Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today. We're going to do something a little different. We are stepping away from the spreadsheets, ignoring the cold hard math, and leaving those sterile percentage points behind for a bit. Instead, we're embarking on a journey into the deeply psychological side of financial planning. We're going to unpack what actually drives our financial behaviors, why just piling up wealth is really only half the battle, and how we can ultimately align our money with actual meaning. Okay, let's dive right into this.
Let me hit you with a real question right out of the gate, and I want you to be totally honest with yourself here. Does your money actually support the life you want? And I don't just mean, do you have enough to cover the electric bill? I mean, if you look at your bank balance right now, does that number actually translate into a real sense of security, purpose, and personal happiness? Just take a second to really think about that, because the data out there tells a fascinating and honestly a pretty alarming story about how rare that alignment actually is.
Look at this single, shocking number, 12%. According to some recent research from Edward Jones in partnership with Gallup, only 12% of Canadians say their finances truly support the life they want. I mean, think about that. The vast majority of people out there are experiencing this massive gap between their financial stability on paper and how they actually feel waking up every day.
So if we break this down, we essentially see three distinct emotional states when it comes to money. Like we said, a tiny 12% are truly fulfilled. But on the other end, a massive 41% experience money as a constant, heavy source of pressure and stress. And right in the messy middle, 47% of people are in this highly fragile, conflicted state. They might look perfectly stable in some areas, but they are incredibly vulnerable to setbacks. So you have to ask, why is this happening? Why is there such a massive disconnect for so many of us?
That brings us to Section 1, the financial fulfillment gap. Why wealth doesn't always equal wellness.
From a young age, we're basically conditioned to believe a myth. We're told that simply increasing our net worth will automatically increase our happiness, but the reality, true financial fulfillment requires value alignment. It demands a sense of purpose in how your money supports your actual life. It means having significantly fewer negative emotions about your finances and a genuine feeling of control. Those fulfilled adults in the 12% don't just feel better about their cash, they actually report better physical and mental health and even stronger personal relationships. Because fulfillment isn't defined by wealth alone, right? It's defined by what that wealth enables you to actually do. Let's move to Section 2, Your Brain on Money, Uncovering Hidden Biases. Okay, so to figure out why achieving this fulfillment is so incredibly hard, we've got to look under the hood. A huge piece of this puzzle is a concept financial therapist Derek Hagen calls money scripts. Basically, these are our core beliefs about money that we develop super early in life, and they subconsciously drive our behaviors forever. Hagen shares this really powerful story about himself. He grew up in poverty, and he developed this script that simply getting more money would literally fix everything in his life, which is exactly why he went into finance. But he eventually realized that the best financial advice in the world is totally worthless if our internal scripts are quietly preventing us from putting it into action. And let me tell you, those internal scripts, they make us incredibly susceptible to panic. We are constantly confusing economic reality with market noise. As research from Baird points out, just because the stock market is going through wild daily volatility doesn't actually mean a recession is right around the corner. It's kind of like assuming every single cloudy day is going to turn into a massive hurricane. Yet our emotions constantly trick our brains into abandoning solid long-term growth indicators just to react to the short-term noise.
Let's put that into perspective. Take a look at this historical data from Baird. It tracks the S&P 500 against crude oil prices all the way back to 1984. Now, investors often totally panic when the price of oil drops, assuming it's a giant red flag for immediate economic doom. But just look at the data. Over the long term, there is essentially zero correlation between day-to-day oil price changes and stock prices. Actually, historically speaking, declining oil prices have often spurred economic growth. But our biased brains just see a short-term drop and immediately scream, danger.
Now for Section 3, the decumulation dilemma, the hardest problem in finance. So this brings us to a phase of life where these emotional biases become incredibly high stakes. Listen, if you are stressed out about spending your money in retirement, you are entirely validated. Don't just take my word for it. Nobel Prize-winning economist William Sharpe literally called decumulation the nastiest, hardest problem in finance. It's not just a math problem. It is an absolute psychological minefield. And all of this builds into an immense internal struggle for retirees. You end up with this constant, exhausting tension between rational economic logic, like, sensible drawdowns and safe withdrawal rates, and your deep-seated, messy human emotions. Retirement isn't just checking off a financial milestone.
It involves a continuous series of emotionally charged, high-stakes decisions that leave so many people feeling entirely overwhelmed.
Research from Pensions Age highlights exactly which cognitive biases are paralyzing us here. Loss aversion is a massive one. Basically, the fear of losing money totally outweighs the potential joy of any gains. And that causes about 70% of mid-retirees to become so overly cautious that they actually spend far less than they could afford to. On the flip side, you have present bias, which pushes others to overspend way too early. And then there's choice overload, which simply causes people to freeze up like a deer in headlights and do nothing at all.
We can actually see this play out perfectly if we look at UK pension policy. When the UK introduced auto-enrollment, it was a huge success. Why? Because it leaned right into our human nature, specifically our laziness, our inertia. It made saving the default option. But then when they introduced pension freedoms in 2015, which granted total flexibility, people struggled hard. They were just hit with massive choice overload. As a result, over half of the pension pot's access since then have been fully withdrawn, and mostly just held in cash, simply because people wanted to avoid the immense stress of making complex choices.
All right, Section 4, Maximizing Return on Life, a New Paradigm.
So the psychological problems are crystal clear, right? But what's the actual solution? Well, financial advisor Paul Peeler talks about moving away from the old, sterile way of focusing strictly on what he calls amounts and accounts. Instead, the modern, effective approach focuses on return on life, which is a brilliant philosophy developed by Mitch Anthony. It's all about ensuring your money acts as a functional tool to support your deepest life aspirations, rather than just endlessly chasing a higher number on a spreadsheet.
To really show you how powerful this paradigm shift is, Peeler shares this incredible story. He took a high-powered corporate executive through this life-centered discovery process, and she became visibly emotional. She was literally brought to tears as they dug past the numbers into her true why. At the end of that meeting, her reaction wasn't about the portfolio yield. She simply looked at him and said, "Thank you for hearing me." That is the deep, profound emotional impact of actually aligning your money with your meaning.
And the great news is, there are very tangible, real-world strategies to achieve this meaningful wealth today. From an investing standpoint, as Baird notes, you can utilize socially responsible investing, or SRI, using ESG criteria and green bonds. That lets you deliberately align your investments with your personal moral code. From a planning perspective, it means using modern tech for interactive scenario modeling. You and your advisor actually collaborate in real time, and you walk away with highly concise, bulleted action summaries so you actually know exactly what to do next, instead of having a 50-page report shoved in your face that you'll never read.
Finally, Section 5, the power of guidance. You don't have to do this alone.
If there's one overarching takeaway from all this research, it's that you do not have to navigate this psychological minefield all by yourself. Financially fulfilled adults are nearly 3 times more likely to have worked with a financial advisor in the past year compared to those experiencing financial stress. The Edward Jones data is incredibly clear on this point. Having professional guidance powers your peace of mind way better than personal research, watching the news, or even asking an AI.
But, and this is a big but, it has to be the right kind of guidance. Paul Peeler outlines a highly effective, modern workflow that completely replaces that old-school dictation model. It starts with a low-pressure second opinion meeting just to test the waters. Then you move to a true discovery meeting that focuses entirely on your life, not just your financial data. Finally, you have a tactile collaboration meeting. The advisor doesn't just hand you a binder and say good luck. They work right there with you to model out different scenarios so you have total ownership over your plan. Now you might be wondering, how does a great advisor even find the time to focus so heavily on your return on life? It comes down to the brilliant systems running behind the scenes. Peeler notes that about 90% of his daily operations are strategically outsourced using virtual assistants and automated workflows. This extreme level of efficiency doesn't just help his business, it frees up massive amounts of his time for complex human-to-human client collaboration. It even allows him to do dedicated pro bono work, like helping families who are trying to navigate serious mental illness.
I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Based on everything we've looked at today, from uncovering your hidden money scripts to facing down the decumulation dilemma, ask yourself, are you just managing your accounts, or are you intentionally designing your life? True financial fulfillment is absolutely out there, but it requires aligning your resources with your core values. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this sparks some genuine curiosity about your own financial psychology. Catch you next time.